You are free to start.
Awesome. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the meeting of the Reinvestment Committee. Call the meeting to order and do a quick attendance check. Andrea Comer.
Present.
Corey Betts. Avery Gaddis.
Here.
Sabira Gordon. Michael Jefferson.
Here.
No Mike. John Aim present, and Paula Robertson.
Present.
Thank you. I'd also like to welcome all of our additional council members that have joined in for the call. Thank you for joining us today. First agenda item, approval of the minutes from February 15th and February 28th. Can I entertain a motion for approval?
So moved, Madam Chairwoman.
I'll second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes. Excellent. Next item on the agenda is an update on the budget and OPM discussions. Executive Director Clay had sent out an email on Friday, I believe, updating the full council on the conversation with OPM that was had on Thursday. Director Clay, can you just give us a quick high-level recap, and then I'd like to open it up for questions from the committee members.
Sure. So as stated in the email, I'm just going to say long story short, it was a very good meeting with OPM. We got a lot of clarity. But the story at the end of the day is the $10.7 million that the council had for use in fiscal year 23 was a line of credit. It wasn't actual cash. This line of credit what will be taken from the social equity innovation account. And then right now, as we understand that all state agencies that had cannabis responsibilities will be reimbursed from the account, and the balance of the account will be transferred into the Social Equity Innovation Fund. They're expecting about $20 million to be the balance of from the account after DCP, Department of Motor Vehicle, Office of the Attorney General. So all of those agencies that had any kind of cannabis stand-up responsibilities, they're reimbursed, then the balance goes. And then as of July 1st, the Social Equity Innovation Fund becomes the fund of the council. So anything that we don't spend in this fiscal year will be available to us in fiscal year 24 by way of the fees. So there's $20 million. And then the 5.8 that we have as an operating budget to pay for salary and fringe and other program related activities is all of what is expected to come from the sales tax. And so that's how our budget will operate is we'll get the sales tax and then for this year, and then going forward, the balances from the sales tax will be in the fund. So that's clear. I think the more I talk, the more I'll confuse you, but.
So just to recap, the dollars that were set aside in this year's budget were coming from the Social Equity Innovation Fund account.
Yeah.
And those that are not used from a reinvestment perspective will go back into the fund.
We'll go into the account and then into the fund.
Just acknowledging that Councilmember Jefferson has joined.
Good afternoon.
Can I ask a clarifying question, Adala?
Yes, and Councilmember Jefferson, if you wouldn't mind muting. Okay, thank you. Councilwoman Gordon, go ahead.
So the fund, is this a non-lapsing fund? Like, how long does the money stay in that fund? How long do we have to spend it? Can you provide a little bit of clarity? I understand for this time around, but is that a one-off or is that annually whatever is not spent is put into this fund and we could continue to use our access.
Yeah, so my understanding is what the 20 million that we're going to see is that one-time conversion fee, the large number for conversion fees. That is the money, the 42 million that we've been talking about. That's a one time. So the balance of that goes into the account, and then whatever is left over goes into the fund. Those are the non-lapsing funds that will remain in the fund until they are spent. I did not ask, actually didn't ask if that fund ever gets swept, and I will go back and ask that question, and I don't know if Member Pelka has an answer to that, but I will get clarification that at any time will the social equity fund get swept if funds are left in there. But it's my understanding is non-lapsing actual funds that they do not get swept, but I don't make that final decision. So we'll get clarity on that.
Additional questions? No further questions on the budget and OPM discussion? Then we will move on to our next agenda item. Legal updates. I believe we have Attorney McTravy on the call. Last meeting, we had made a request to clarify the impacts of how we are dispersing money and the effects it may have on individuals that are receiving it that may also receive federal funding to ensure that we are not setting anyone up for challenges when it comes to what they can and can't do with the funding.
Thank you very much, Chairperson Naeem. Through you, Madam Chair, I've started researching this legal issue that you raised at the previous meeting. And part of that effort has led me to contact the other states who have already started reinvesting cannabis revenues in their communities, notably California. And what was conveyed to me is that the issue didn't come up over there at all. And the California cannabis reinvestment has already started reinvesting, and they actually have a grant program as well. That's almost similar to what this committee is proposing. Uh, and so far, they say none of the organizations that are receiving this grant have been flagged by the federal government to the best of their knowledge, even though they disclose publicly that these grants are based on cannabis sales tax revenue. It didn't come up. Now, I continue looking into the issue. The only legal impediment that I found, and this is provided by the IRS itself, is that when it comes to professional organizations, such as organizations like chambers of commerce that are seeking to be registered at the IRS as a 501c3, there's an illegality requirement. And if the purpose of the organization is to further the promotion of cannabis or THC product, then at that point, IRS is refusing to certify those organizations as a 501c3 organization. But I have not come across any situations where the federal government sort of rejected the grant to a private nonprofit or entity that has received reinvestment money from a state that has legalized adult use cannabis. So at this point, that's the state of the research that I've conducted, but I'm continue to look into it as this is an issue that's developing. I had a scheduled conversation later this month with the other states who are also making effort to start their community investment project. About 2 weeks ago, Illinois actually put out their very ambitious community investment project, and the state of Missouri is also looking into that. So all the social equity organization in the country will be meeting to discuss and kind of analyze, make sure we all are accurate on the legal aspect of this very important question that you have so well articulated in this meeting. That's all I'm able to convey at this time to this honorable committee. Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Any questions, I'll be able to answer.
Thank you, Attorney Matravy. We have Council Member Shirley. Go ahead.
Thank you. Excuse my my dog in the background. Question is, appreciate the work you're doing on that, Attorney Matravy. My question is, it's such a critical issue for some of these the nonprofits that will be looking to get funding. Is it possible to get a formal legal opinion as to whether they could take money from us if they are not engaged in the cannabis business, but are but get federal money? Just one, is that something that we should look into? Or what's your thought on that?
Councilmember Shirley, thank you so much for asking that question. I will caution the council on having our office provide that legal advice to our constituent because each one of these grants is different. Even though all federal grants refer to the Controlled Substance Act, the way it's worded for instance, a grant that will be awarded to a state agency is different from the way they will word it to a grant that will be provided, let's say, to a YMCA or a local organization somewhere in a small town in Connecticut. So what we could say though is that these organizations should seek legal counsel themselves from their own attorneys to properly evaluate the risk that they will be taking when applying for this grant. But like I say, uh, other states clearly said that it didn't even come up, that even if I didn't ask the question, they wouldn't even think about it. That it just, no one has even raised the question. So that's all I'll be able to say on that today.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much, Council Member.
Additional questions for Attorney Matravy? Excellent. Thank you so much for that update. Moving on to our next agenda item, outreach update. So the outreach committee chair, Chairwoman Gordon, and Executive Director Clay have been working on a RFP for the community conversations, as well as conversations with existing foundations to understand what the process would look like if we were to invest some of the reinvestment dollars directly through the foundations. Director Clay and Councilwoman Gordon, would either of you be able to provide an update on that? And Director Clay, maybe you can just quickly give a overview of the RFP as well.
I think Council Member Gordon said she would do the update. So if she's
Okay.
not able, I know she's traveling, so if she's not, I'm prepared.
I didn't see her in mute, so maybe you can just get us started.
Okay, no worries. So the outreach scope of work, I did send over what the responsibilities of the facilitator. So what we're trying to do here, or what we plan to do here, is to hire, and it could be, and I'm recommending that we hire more than one vendor to facilitate, organize, and collect data during town hall meetings, community conversations, whatever we ultimately decide to call this. So they would be very familiar with the communities that we are trying to have these conversations in. So I'm recommending that we hire someone local, or again, someone who is known as a trusted messenger to carry out these conversations. Like I said, we should do them more than one at a time. We should do them simultaneously. If we can do two or do all five together, that would be great, because I think we could do them separately in the various communities. I did put forward some recommendations. We talked to Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, because they do a lot of community conversations around COVID and other public health announcements. And so they gave us a couple of names of folks that they've worked with. We've been floating around a couple of other names that have been put out there. So the council will just need to review this document and come up with the final, um, decision on how you want to handle this. So is it going to be 5 vendors? Is it going to be 3 vendors? And if you have any additional questions or recommendations that may not be in this proposal or this scope of work.
Thank you, Director Clay. My only concern about going through multiple vendors is that they will take their own approaches to it. So you may find some inconsistencies in what you're getting back, or the types of questions or process being used, which could lead to not inaccuracies, but maybe not consistencies across the board. Is there a significant concern that a single vendor may not be able to conduct all of them?
With the timing that we have, so we have about 60 days to.
We
at
are
least-
not restricted
let me
to these conversations happening before the end of the fiscal year.
Right. So my point is that if we plan to pay out of this tranche of money, the 10.7, we have to have contracts in place and executed within 60 days. So
My
if
understanding, based on the conversation within this committee, was we would like to get these started and get back what we can as they go as quickly as we can.
Okay.
But we do not want to jeopardize the quality and time that needs to go into having these conversations, and therefore did not necessarily want to restrict them all to be complete within the next 30 days. But if other council members feel differently, please do let me know.
I mean, this is the kind of the big picture,
One of
so
them
kind of
feels differently.
narrowing it down. It was my understanding that we wanted the conversations and the timeline that we put together, that is proposed, that they would happen in fairly short order. But
The goal is we would
can-
have a readout by, I think the original goal was that we would try to get them done within April into early May.
Mhm.
Councilman Jefferson, you have your hand up?
I do. I feel differently. I agree with Director Clay. We should have this matter handled within the 60 days. I mean, the whole idea of the reinvestment and building this framework was to give us an opportunity to approach the legislature and request additional funding for 24 and 25. So now we push this thing beyond the 30 days. It gives them an excuse, or someone an excuse, not to honor the commitment for reinvestment that everyone has proclaimed from the beginning of this project. I don't want to jeopardize that, and I think that's what will happen if we don't. Because now it'll be, well, you guys took your sweet time, that money is gone. No, I want to get something before the legislature as in this fiscal year and during this legislative session, so we don't run into that roadblock. I approach to this process, and that was my understanding, that we would do it in 60 days. We all know the needs anyway, so we have to use additional vendors and whatnot. So be it. Let's get it done. I do not want to. I think it's unwise for us to push this beyond the fiscal year. We jeopardize funding. Then what do we tell our constituents? What do we tell the communities most in need? Oh, sorry, we still wanted to figure out your needs before we could dole out this money. Absolutely not. That's my position, and I'm holding firm to it.
Councilmember Jefferson, I just want to make sure I understood clearly. Are you concerned, is part of your concern that we won't be able to go back to the legislature to request the additional funds for reinvestment for the coming fiscal year if we don't get this done before the end of the fiscal year?
That was my understanding. My understanding was we did not build a framework. We recommended a budget way back in November, and we had $16 million and 20 for 24, 50, and 21 million for 25 as part of our reinvestment money, which I thought was good numbers, quite frankly. We were told that budget was scratched in favor of a budget based on projected tax revenue for cannabis. 5.8 for 24, and I don't know, 10 or 11 for 25. And that's based on the tax revenue of the cannabis tax revenue. That and it was all because we didn't put some framework, or the executive director and staff didn't put a framework together. So now we're building a framework. And now we're saying, okay, let's not rush the framework. Well, if we don't rush the framework, we don't put a framework together. And just because we're rushing it doesn't mean it's not going to be a good framework. If we don't have a framework, we can't get the money. Let's have the framework. Let's put it together. Let's get the results from the community, and let's approach the legislature and say, these are the needs of the community. We need money from that honeypot. Committed to 24 and 25.
Thank you. I just want to clarify that the framework and process that I believe OPM was looking for, and the community conversations are not one and the same. The framework, the community conversations are part of the framework and part of the approach, and not necessarily the framework itself. So I just did want to clarify that. Councilman Gordon, you have your hand up?
Yeah, so I'm out of security now. So I just wanted to provide a little bit of clarity. I'm not sure how much Director Clay shared, but what we are doing right now is, in addition to community conversation, I'm meeting with Ursula Hughes from the Prosperity Foundation tomorrow, and I'm meeting with the Hispanic Federation that run a very similar process of getting funds out to the community and getting kind of a short list of what are the priority things that you have funded in the last year, or what the asks have been, because these are organizations that are funding, or they're funding small nonprofits in our communities to do very similar work. So I think they're both running parallel to each other. It's not an either or. So I agree with you, Councilman Jefferson. I don't think we should be waiting until the community conversations are happening. These are all happening at the same time to get a way to get these resources out in the community, I think, by the end of this fiscal year, specifically for this year. So I think, I'm not sure how the information was shared because I wasn't able to be on, but that is the intent. The intent is to walk and chew gum at the same time, to listen, build the framework, and the conversations we're having with the funders is, I think we don't have to do all of this. I think these systems already exist in the state that we just need to tap into. There's a community investment fund at EECD. I think we're waiting for a report to figure out how could we use a very similar framework to get the funds out. I think there's going to be some organizations that can go through the ECD, but I do think some of the much smaller nonprofits will have to use like a Prosperity Foundation or a Hispanic Federation that they already have a relationship with, and they can say, hey, we have these funds available, we want to work with you to get them out. So that's how I've been thinking about it, and I'm welcome to get some feedback from others if you think this is not the best way. But I think for the short term, for this year, we kind of just have to work with frameworks that already exist and figure out how we can tap into them, and while at the same time building whatever is going to be the SEC's framework for dispersing funds.
Thank you, Councilwoman Gordon. And just to clarify, because I know you weren't on the call, the discussion started from Executive Director Clay shared the overview of the RFP and recommended that we go after multiple firms that can run community conversations. And so that's where the conversation had started. I appreciate you providing the extra clarity around the conversations that you have been having as well. The hands are raising, so I will move to the next hand. Councilwoman Valeries.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to address all of you. I'm listening very intently. This is a very important topic. It is the essence of what the Social Equity Council has been brought together to do. And there's a lot of great work that we'll all do together. I did want to bring just two things to your attention. First is a workforce development plan. We collectively decided to move that workforce plan underneath community investment, because developing a cohesive, good workforce system and providing opportunity for people to have, ladders to livable wages is an essence of community reinvestment. We have a lot of work to do, obviously, to get that those programs up and running robustly within the state of Connecticut's framework. However, we do have an opportunity to work with potentially Oaksterdam with a contract amendment to provide them the resources necessary to start some of this training immediately, as they have the expertise and the programs already available that we can begin to use and scale. So I make a proposal that we think about how much of this community reinvestment funding we would like to invest in workforce development and start this work with Oaksterdam as we onboard a new cannabis workforce coordinator under the Office of Workforce Strategy. We had hundreds of applications for this position. It's been whittled down to about 60 applications at this point in time. As we whittle that group down to a more manageable candidate pool with the help of human resources, we will be working with Ginny Ray and DECD on their input for a putting together an interview committee to help select so that we're all comfortable with the selection of this person. Once that person gets on board, then we'll be able to really focus on going through the workforce plans that all of the licensees have submitted, really understanding what their detailed needs are, and then start to stand up programs across the state of Connecticut so that we can keep that money here in Connecticut and reinvesting it back into our communities. So I'm proposing that, today, if possible, we kind of think about that. And then also thinking about taking the workforce committee and moving that committee under this committee. And currently the workforce committee is made up of myself and Councilman Gaddis. And so I think we need a bigger voice and role in workforce, and would love to have that fall within the privy of this committee. So 2 proposals here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Just to recap, the first is around opportunities for reinvestment, which I'm not sure we'll be able to take action on, but I do think it's important for us to understand that those opportunities are on the table today. And the second is the request around the movement of the committee, which I believe will have to defer to either governance or the full council, but I think it's heard loud and clear on that one as well. Thank you. Councilman Comer, did you have your hand up?
No, I'm all set. Thank you.
Okay. Executive Director Clay?
Yeah, so I just wanted to go back to my notes on the time frame for the community conversations. And during our conversation last week, we talked about getting the scope of work out by the 20th, if possible, and then having it due back by the 27th and begin the conversations no later than April 15th. And so if we're doing one at a time, that, and again, it's if you want to do one at a time, that's fine. But if we wanted to wrap those up by, we said mid-May, you're not going to be able to have one company do 5 conversations that are posed in the larger cities. So that's why I put it that way.
Should we let the companies respond to that? I mean, I'm sure they're not all one-person companies, and they have staff that can be split up amongst running multiple sessions simultaneously. And when I say simultaneously, I don't mean they have to be on the same exact day, but within that period of time.
Yeah, and one last comment was that the conversations were supposed to also shape this proposal that we are submitting to the legislature, and we wanted to hear from the community. So that's why we were doing the conversations and using the data and information that we gather to add to the proposal to the legislature.
Other questions, comments? Councilman Comer.
Thank you. Maybe I'm confused. I thought that we were having these community conversations to inform the distribution of resources for FY24, and at the same time having a parallel track where we would figure out a process by which funds would be distributed that we currently have available. So I think what I'm confused about is the timing around the community conversations and why we're talking about bringing stuff before the legislature when the legislature I mean, their session will be ending at the end of May, and if we're talking about FY '24, then this is a whole other session.
Thank you for that. And I will attempt to clarify, based on the conversations we've had over the last 4 reinvestment committee meetings, as well as conversations I've had with Executive Director Clay. The intent was we are having community conversations to help really hone in and refine how we are and where we are investing with fiscal year 24 funds. Now, if we get them somehow in time for this fiscal year, great. We can leverage that, but that was the goal. So that is a piece of the process. OPM, in order to feel confident about taking a budget item, line item to the legislature for appropriations, needs a structured process and faith that there is time, energy, process, vision being put behind it on what is our approach overall for reinvestment. The community conversations, even running them, is a piece of that process. It is not the process as a whole. The process to me is we are having conversations with foundations. We have created a NOFA that goes out directly to the community to entertain, folks have ideas within the tracks that we've identified for investment for this year that comes in. We are having community conversations for fiscal year 24. We have a structure that says these are the areas we're interested in. This is a process we're taking, and here's how we're going to, reinvest the money. We do not, it is my understanding that we do not need to spell out exactly what and how much individual reinvestment is happening for fiscal year 24. We have time to figure out, okay, we're giving X thousands of dollars to Y company or organization to do Z programming, but we need a structure and framework in terms of how is that process going to entail. So by that, you are correct that the community conversations happen. We don't want to delay them and say, okay, we can tackle that in the fall. No, we want to show that we are actively engaging in them and doing them as part of our process so that we can go back to OPM and the legislature to request appropriation for fiscal year 24, but they do not dictate how and what we are investing in. So we have 3 separate pieces of process moving to show we are doing our work. The staff is doing their work to understand what our opportunities are for disbursement of this money. Does that help clarify the question?
Through you, Madam Chair. Yes, it does. Thank you.
Councilman Shirley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So at this point, is it appropriate for existing organizations to apply for community for the reinvestment dollars that are there, and then if so, to whom would they submit an application?
So we will get to that once we hit the line item around the NOFA. We're not there yet.
Okay.
Right now, we're talking about the outreach RFP, and I'd like to entertain a motion to approve the outreach RFP as it's written. I think
So
I'll
moved.
pause it there.
I'll second
Does-
Councilman Jefferson's motion.
Great. Discussion. Do we have any preference on one versus multiple vendors to conduct these sessions? Councilwoman Comer.
Through you, Madam Chair. I don't have a preference. However, I do want to assure that if there is going to be just one, that it is an entity that has the ability for translation for our various constituencies that we are trying to reach, and that they have the ability, probably would need to be a statewide entity that can reach the various geographies because they've already had reach in those communities.
Thank you.
I agree with that.
Any further discussion? Okay, bring the motion to vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? Great. So Director Clay, I believe we're good to move forward, to put this out, as soon as possible. It looks good. And I think you'll have to use your judgment once you see what kind of responsive you have coming in terms of, can one agency handle it, or do we need to use multiple? But I do appreciate, Councilman Comer's point on translation services and reach across the state. Thank you all. Next item, Department of Administration Services update. Last meeting, there was a request put on for, to the executive director to have a conversation with DAS, to see if there are ways we might be able to disperse this money faster, as was done during the pandemic. Executive Director Clay, do you have any updates on that?
So we did not speak yet directly with DAS, but did have several conversations with the Department of Economic and Community Development, Procurement, and Finance team. So we think we have this worked out, but we are also looking for a more direct contact at DAS, and also Councilmember Pelka has offered to work through the OPM system to see how we can move the funds faster.
Thank you. Any questions pertaining to that for Director Clay? Right, and then tied in with that, next item is the DECD update. So one of the questions that was presented was, can we leverage the Community Investment Fund to disperse this money? And my understanding, based on previous conversations, was we can leverage their guidelines and framework, but we cannot leverage them as a vehicle, as they have their own restrictions on how they disperse money, and review processes that we would have to follow, which would not necessarily make the disbursement of the Social Equity Council's reinvestment funds much faster. Director Clay, any updates on that?
Yep, that is correct. And we're still working with CIF, Community Investment Fund, in modeling the process by which, so yes, we are continuing those conversations, but will not be able to use them as a mechanism to disperse funds.
Further questions or comments around DECD questions or updates? Councilmember Pelka.
Sorry, sorry, thank you. I know I'm not a member of the subcommittee. Sorry, could the executive director just repeat that? I missed some of the content. So, because is it for the 2023 reinvestment, we'll utilize the Community Investment Fund? I just didn't hear. Were you describing ED? Like, I just couldn't hear it.
Yeah, so we're looking at the model by which they are. So the review process of applications, their applications. So the framework that they use to disperse money as a new program, as our program would be a new program as well.
And so, so the Community Investment Fund would not be the recipient of the funding to be dispersed. What you're saying is that we would create, SEC would create a disbursement model emulating.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Additional questions? Thank you. Next item on the agenda, the reinvestment NOFA. So this was a document Director Clay sent out on Friday, which outlines a notice of funds availability around, Councilman Jefferson, do you have a question pertaining to the last item, or?
Yes, yes, I had a technical glitch. Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. In terms of this DECD process, would the Social Equity Council still maintain control over whatever funding source we create, or that's created by DECD?
Through you, Madam Chair. So we're using the model. We're not using the fund, the staff or the resources of the fund. We're using their model to develop a process for the council, and the council will maintain 100% control.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm good.
Continue on the reinvestment OFA. This document was created to outline what the funding distribution availability is, where we might be, what types of projects may be eligible, and what the process would look like in terms of how applicants would apply. What we don't have yet is how are we reviewing the applications that are coming in? What is the review criteria for funding eligibility? And then, what's the review criteria for the staff versus for the council? So Director Clay, that is something I'm hoping you can get to us as soon as possible because it would be difficult to move forward on the NOFA without making sure that we have the latter half of that structured and clear.
So one question I would have is with the fact and the information that these funds have to be dispersed by the end of the fiscal year to be used in this fiscal year. Would the council consider, this committee consider making a couple of awards instead of trying to put it out there and have 100 applications, because we're not going to get to 100 applications in 6 days. So we could use, Councilwoman Gordon said she's going to talk to the Prosperity Foundation and a couple of other foundations. Would we consider making awards to certain foundations and having them distribute funds and take applications based on our criteria that the council approves before they disperse the funds? So
I believe we are entertaining all avenues right now, and until we have clarity from any or all of those foundations that they're able to do this in a timely manner and manage it, it's difficult to say that yes, that's where we're going to place all of our bets.
So then the review process becomes different. So I did do a high level review process in the document.
So before we dive into the review process, let's just go over the NOFA itself, and I want to ensure if council members have questions or concerns on what's in the NOFA that we're addressing those first.
Okay.
So to highlight sort of what stood out to me is we're capping the grants to be at the lowest threshold $50,000 and at the highest threshold $500,000. The other area I think that's important for council members to kind of reflect on is what project eligibility looks like. Director Clay, I see that planning grants are still in there. I am opposed to planning grants because that doesn't, my concern is that doesn't actually help us see the challenges that exist in the community. It's more so to understand the challenges. And I've too frequently seen planning grants result into binders of plans that sit on shelves. So my recommendation would be to remove planning grants out of that.
So just leave it in and see what the rest of the members felt about it. So that's why I didn't take that.
Yep.
That's fine to take out.
Other thoughts, questions, comments, concerns on the NOFA? This is the document, and to the question that Councilmember Shirley asked earlier, that would outline the parameters of what we're willing to fund as a council, and what that process would potentially look like. Councilmember Shirley, you're on mute. I think you're speaking. Oh, and you.
Thank you. I think my question was answered. I appreciate it, Madam Chair. I was asking, really, in addition to the material that's in this document, I was asking to whom would an applicant apply, and I think at this point we're not sure that might be another organization or another entity that has not yet been
through the NOFA. They would apply to the Office of the Social Equity Council.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes. The other question I would have for the council members is, the timeline that is proposed obviously starts today. That is not feasible. We would have to push this out a little bit. But do we need a full council approval on this process is my first question. My second question is, the conversations with the foundations are going to take some more time. I know Councilwoman Gordon has one lined up for tomorrow. I don't think that they're going to say overnight, yep, we'll take on these funds and we'll figure out a plan to do it. And I don't know if we want to wait to see where those conversations go before putting out the NOFA. My thought is to put out the NOFA, see what we get in, continue those foundation conversations as another track for disbursement. There is a concern of, the money we have to spend. Feels like a lot for us to spend right now, but once we open the floodgates, it might have more demand than we have supply for. So do we restrict it in some way so that, we're able to manage it more appropriately? So it's not, we have 1,000 applications to screen. One potential avenue of restricting it is to be more focused on which one of these, we've got 3 big buckets of reinvestment. Do we focus on 2 of them for this first round or 1 of them for this first round, so that we are more clear and direct in scope, but that also helps us manage applications that come in. It is very difficult to say because we don't know what we're going to get. We might only get 10 applications. That makes it a lot easier for us to review. But that is something that I want to put out there for consideration and would love to hear from fellow council members on how they feel about it from a process perspective.
Through you, Madam Chair. I just want to remind you that when we put this out there, if we do plan to issue funds by the end of this fiscal year, we have 60 days to make that happen. So if we get 1,000 applications, we're not going to be able to review 1,000 applications, make awards in 60 days, and distribute funds. So I would recommend that we limit who can apply for these funds and make the decision as to whether we're going to fund larger sums of money to foundations and let them apply, or if we're just going to open it up to the public and let anybody apply. But we're not going to get through distributing funds by the end of this fiscal year if we have lots and lots of applications. So we'll have to prioritize.
Councilman Jefferson, you have your hand up.
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, I do. The executive director stole my thunder. She said exactly what I was thinking, and I think her approach, she's spot on, 100%. And we're setting our own office up to fail, and I just think that's imprudent. I think we have to do exactly what she said. I think we have to find those disbursement organizations and allow them to do that work for us. That just makes the most sense to me. If we plan on getting these grants out in 60 days time. So I don't want to belabor the point, but she laid it out.
Thank you. And to that point, do we have, again, my concern is that those conversations and organizations are also just not moving fast enough for us to be able to disperse through them, or even get them the disbursement within 60 days based on how those conversations have not developed in the last 30. And so I'm just a bit concerned about keeping avenues open if those conversations with those foundations don't move fast enough. I've got to imagine that they're going to need to do some due diligence and set up their own restricted accounts for disbursement of these funds if we were to go through them. But if there's any additional insight anyone has on what that process looks like or how fast or slow it might move, it would be very helpful. Got some more hands up. Let me just check the order. Councilman Jefferson, your hand is still up. I think that's from before. Councilman Comer.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. So while I definitely understand the bandwidth challenges in terms of reviewing several applications, and this is part of the reason why I made the recommendation of getting some some insight or feedback from DAS in terms of potential workarounds. Because what I'm not comfortable with is us making a decision independently about who should get this money. I think we are inviting trouble. I think depending upon who gets it, this is a council with lots of connections to other organizations. I worry that the question of conflict of interest will be flagged and raised. So, again, I know that when we had a public health emergency, DAS quickly figured out how to get some resources out there in the community. And while this is not a public health emergency, I'm sure there must be a way for us to do this so that we do not run afoul of the regulations that we need to follow as a state entity. Thank you.
Councilman Gaddis.
Thank you very much. To the executive director, do those funds have to be dispersed in 60 days or encumbered in 60 days? Because that's totally different. And I know for a fact that sometimes if those funds are encumbered before July 1st, that counts. Is that the case?
No, they have to be dispersed.
All right, thank you.
Councilman Robertson.
Just a recommendation that the NOFA go out to only maybe DIA communities.
So I believe in the NOFA, it says that the work has to impact DIA communities.
So
I don't
would
know.
we not start there?
Are you saying only organizations within DIA communities can respond?
I would say more start there as a starting point, just in terms of looking at different ways to approach it. Because that would also kind of create not a cap, but it would be a workable amount of communities to look at and keep it an open kind of playing field to look at. And it also targets kind of who we're after, right? So we start with that as the focus in terms of how we build around it. I mean, everything we do is about disparaged communities and impacting them. So why wouldn't we start there in terms of the look as far as calling applications? So again, it's just a thought and an input.
Yeah, there was some discussion around that previously, and I've had some conversation with the executive director on it as well. I think the concern was if there is an organization that does good work, but they happen to be located outside of a DIA, but their work is directly impacting the constituents within the DIA, they would then be they would not qualify for funding. Director Clay?
So in the NOFA, we have eligible applicants, and we could limit the eligible applicants. So we have probably 2, 4, 6, 8, about 8 different types of applicants that we would receive. So maybe we do this as a pilot, this first round of funding as a pilot, and restrict those organizations that can apply. So we've got neighborhood councils and NRZs that could apply, that may not have the resources to manage the funds. Okay, but they will make an application. So if we are having these conversations with foundations and nonprofits who are already doing this work, maybe we can limit this as a pilot for this first tranche of money. And then as we invest going forward in other fiscal years with our plan, we will open it up to other entities or organizations.
Councilwoman Comer?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. This is just an additional suggestion, just as we seek to sort of narrow down the applicants. This is first and foremost around addressing communities that were impacted by the war on drugs. And to me, there is a direct connection between the war on drugs and mass incarceration. And I'm wondering if it wouldn't benefit us to, and as we are looking at sort of pilots, do we want to focus our first effort on entities that are assisting formerly incarcerated individuals with reentering society, because that is a direct hit in terms of what this is all about. And then as we have the community conversations, then we can be more broad around fatherhood and education and whatever else may come up. But just in the interest of time, and as we are trying to, really get to the reason why we are all here, maybe that is an approach that would help and would narrow down the number of applications.
Thank you. Councilmember Pelka.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Madam Chair, through you, a question that Councilmember Gaddis asked got me wanting to seek if the executive director would entertain it, just further clarity about what needs to occur within the next 60 business days. I thought I heard her say that the funds need to be expended by the end of the current fiscal year, and I have limited experience in this area. But if I wanted to make sure that I heard it correctly and now we get complete clarity, is that by the end of fiscal year, it's not just that we have to obligate the funds, via purchase order. I think we actually have to expend the funds, don't we? That means essentially cutting a check. So we would have to cut a check to the recipient organizations in the next 60 business days. And that means we would be directly awarding the funds to the entity before we've even begun a process to review expenditures. And I was thinking about grant administration as something. We have a tall order in front of us for the fiscal 2023. We have to complete the announcement, we have to review the applications, make our award decisions. But thereafter, don't we also have to, if the funds are awarded by us, don't we have to then administer the funds, which would mean receiving, expenditure reports and narrative reports. I hate bringing problems. I like to come to, when I raise questions or make statements, I like propose solutions, but I just think it's an area of work that I didn't hear us work through. I guess if I could, continue, hopefully I'm going to just, add a couple of extra concerns and maybe suggest something that could be of help, is that clearly there's a lot of discussion around equity and grant making occurring across all potential funding, private, federal, state. And as a social equity council, I imagine we'd want to support organizations that historically haven't accessed these kinds of funds, and be sure that we're not favoring larger organizations with well-built finance units. We're also supporting the mom and pop startup, smaller organizations, neighborhood. Do you think it's going to be a key part of us? Do we, given the concerns that I raised, and maybe I'll be disabused of them if there is something that I'm missing, but if we are under this tight timeline, we not only have to announce, review applications, make award decisions, but then administer it. If we also not only have to, announce the awards, but actually cut the checks to the entity, maybe we should go down the path of these foundations or some, foundation or some organization that would perhaps respond to a competitive grant application for how, if it received the funds, it would have the capacity that I don't think SEC staff have. They would have a process to be able to create a grant making process, to prioritize equity in grant making, would be able to do a very thorough review of all applications, but also administer the funds from there. I'm really drawn in that direction based on the concerns that I've raised.
Thank you, Councilmember Pelka.
I guess to the ED, if I could, through you, Madam Chair, is anything I said incorrect, or is there anything she could elaborate on? I know that she had a fairly in-depth meeting last week, and through Madam Chair, just want to make sure I'm not creating, an inaccurate or unnecessary concerns.
You're on mute, Executive Director. There you go.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Through you, Madam Chair. So, Councilmember Pelka, the funds have to be dispersed a check has to be cut. And then the funds, then during the budget period of the program budget period, the recipients would spend the funds and then they would start reporting back to us on their management of the funds that have been allocated to them. I just wanted to say that I think that Council Member Comer makes a very good point that if we are doing this as a limited pilot, it gives us a better opportunity to get funds on the street in a more streamlined fashion. So in addition to reentry, for these funds, I would add youth. And I would say that let's do a pilot in the 5 cities that we've looked at that we say we're going to start at first. And maybe it's not 5, maybe it's 3. And we go to foundations in those communities and we outline for them, and it's here on paper in this notice of availability for funds, that the funding would go for reentry and youth programs only during this round, and hit the just as a pilot, 5 cities, 3 cities, and then identify 3 or 4 organizations that would receive the funding, disperse the funding, and report back to the council on the management. Now, let me just go back one step. The council would approve who they are giving the funds to. So if someone makes a recommendation to let's just say the Hartford Foundation, if we awarded money to the Hartford Foundation, this is just let's say we awarded them $1 million and we said these $1 million can only go to Hartford or disproportionately impacted communities, and for these 2 activities. They would receive the applications, and make recommendations. The applications would come back to the council, and the council would have an opportunity to review the request for funding and make an approval. And then the Hartford Foundation would distribute the funds and then receive the reports and turn those back over to the council.
Thank you, Director Clay. I think in my mind that process makes sense, and it addresses, I believe, some of the challenges that Councilmember Pelka has brought up in terms of capacity and ability to do this. And it sounds like a good short-term solution. Just 2 comments. One, I just want us as a council to be very careful about holding down and selecting some cities. I just want to, going back to the comments that Councilwoman Comer made before, I don't want anyone to think that this council is only entertaining certain areas or certain cities, and that we are being as inclusive as possible. But other than that, I think the plan makes sense. If we were to go in that direction and not put out a NOFA much more publicly, I believe we still need to have a lot of conversations with these community foundations to see if they would be willing to accept the money to do this, right? Because it does add administrative work on their ends to go through this process, and I'm sure there's going to be fees affiliated with that and timelines as well. And I don't think we have a good sense of what that looks like. Do we feel we can get some of those conversations done in the next week, or do we feel like we need to put out a NOFA specifically targeting foundations to start that conversation? If you could clarify.
My suggestion would be that we maybe look at some of the Yukon data to determine what pilot census tracts or cities that we go to. Those are the facts. Whether we want to go with the highest incarceration rates and pick from, using some of that data. And then again, identify a group. So whether it's a not-for-profit or it's a foundation, we can have those conversations. We can identify them. I mean, all of us are from the communities that are impacted. And so we can say, look, in Waterbury, there's these 3 organizations. We can check with them. There's 2 organizations in New Haven that come to mind that are dealing directly with the targeted population that we're looking at. And we have those conversations, and we can invite them all to a big one conversation, a webinar, put the information out there, give them the opportunity to respond with their proposals and take it from there.
Thank you. Councilman Jefferson?
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. I think we have to seriously entertain the idea advanced by Councilwoman Comer. I do think it would allay some of the concerns that I have about conflicts of interest as well. I think the executive director added a twist, which I would support, that we entertain youth programming. The summer is approaching. That's very important. So reentry and youth, whatever we do, I think it has to be restricted in order for us to do what we're trying to do in such a short period of time. And I would embrace the whole notion of, doesn't necessarily have to be the community foundation of Harvard or New Haven, but large enough entities that have a proven track record of disbursement, and looking at those restricted entities to give award grants to. I think that would be, it's a hybrid process, but I think it would be effective, and I think it would satisfy certainly my concerns about conflicts of interest among council members if we go in some other direction, and it would take a lot of pressure off the SEC office. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you. Councilman Shirley.
Actually, what Councilman Jefferson just said, I think we can do both. We have the flexibility, it seems, in a pilot program to be able to select foundations, those who have a track record for investing in the kinds of entities that we want to invest in. And at the same time, following what Councilwoman Comer said, I think it is prudent to select those select those organizations that one or two or more that directly deal with the formerly incarcerated who are being brought back into society, and to track both kinds of entities to see what the outcomes are as we go. It is a pilot program, and I think we can identify it as such, and watch the progress as we go.
Thank you, Councilman Shirley. So going to try to recap what I think I'm hearing. We should put out either some sort of request, an alteration to the NOFA targeting foundations only around reentry and youth programming, and really looking for partners that can then manage the grant making process as well as the funds by community for reinvestment, where the council will still review the final applications or grants that are being recommended for approval, but would take the burden of the process off of the office of the council. What that means is we're not opening up to anyone can apply directly to the council, but we're really putting out a request to see what foundations would be interested in working with us, with the hope that they are able to turn around and have a understanding in place and contract in place so that we can disperse this money before the end of the fiscal year. Is that a correct recap? If I missed anything, please speak up. Otherwise, I'm going to assume I got it. Okay, Councilman Jefferson, I don't know if your hand is still up. Okay, thank you.
No, it should.
So then I would like to, I don't know if we need to make a motion, but I think the next steps are Director Clay sort of tweaking this NOFA, and maybe you keep this and as a draft for future use if we need to once we are ready down the road for reinvestment. But leveraging the discussion today, create a new NOFA specifically targeting foundations, and that's it, right? We're restricting it to foundations. Are we in agreement on that, Councilman Gaddis?
I'm sorry. I don't know if I read it in the NOFA, but how are we dealing with administrative fees? Because these large organizations are going to want, 10%. And I personally would like us to put in the material a cap. I think 10% is the going rate, but it's better we address it up front because they're going to have questions when they submit their applications.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I think that's a great point. I agree I've seen it in some places as low as 5, but on average it's 10%. Any hesitance on putting in a cap of 10% for administrative fees?
I think a
Okay.
cap is appropriate, and 10%, I think, depending on the amount, I think we should do a maximum of 10, but we could maybe get to 7 or something like that. But the majority of the money needs to be reinvested and not be used for fees, for salaries.
Thank you. Councilmember Pelko.
Sorry, real quick. I was wondering, I kept saying foundation, but I began to wonder, should we broaden it to 501c3s, academic institutions? I think I consider it a foundation because they're sort of grant-making bodies, but I wondered if there's some entity that falls under a different category that could be a fit. I feel comfortable with other non-foundations, provided they can do the work, and whatever response they would provide us would have to demonstrate they have, significant experience administering large sums of funding. They have, the finance teams that are equipped to perform review, et cetera.
I would recommend for the sake of this being a pilot and our first time testing it, that we start very focused.
Okay.
If you open it up to 501Cs, you're going to get a lot of nonprofit organizations that say, hey, we've administered $100,000 in grants over the last X years or whatever. I don't think that we need a little bit of a higher level of expertise. So I would recommend keeping it restricted unless someone can make a case for others. Councilman Jefferson?
Feel comfortable with that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with Mark. I have to say, because some community foundations are, we have some concerns in Black and Brown communities about how funds are dispersed and to which groups they're dispersed to by these community foundations. I think we should just vet these organizations, the 501c3s, that put forth an application and look at their track record. And if they have a proven track record, and based on whatever criteria we put forth, then we should entertain them as a source for disbursement. I have a little concern just restricting it to foundations. And, when I talked about it, I just put it in, quotes. So I agree with Council Member Pelko on that.
We define that in a NOFA. I guess open question. Would it be grant making organizations?
That sounds right. Wouldn't we essentially describe the duties we'd like the successful respondent to demonstrate in their application? If we want to, that is how the NOFA included examples before. So I don't think we would have to say grant-making organizations. I think we'd say 501c3 foundations, academic institutions, and I'm just thinking out loud here. I don't have much experience with what we're undertaking.
I prefer grant-making institutions only because I think if we cast too wide a net, then we're back to where we started with not having the bandwidth from a staff capacity to be able to figure out who's going to do it and how we narrow it down. And what I don't want to do is, just scatter breadcrumbs around, because that will lessen the impact.
I agree. Okay. Councilman Shirley.
I think we'd also want to add something to the effect that we would want significant oversight with regard to how the foundation is conducting their business, what they do for us. Because number one, we'd like to see what they do, and then to as an answer to Councilman Jefferson's concern, we want to make sure that they are dispersing the funds to those organizations that we consider to be the primary recipients, and it might be different from the track record they've had in the past.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay. Before I kind of recap this, do we have a staff member who's willing to take these next step notes and take them back to the executive director, recognizing that she is no longer on the call?
Available, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Attorney Matravy. I just want to ensure that there is clarity for her and the rest of the staff on what expectations are from the staff. So I think for next steps, we need a draft of the NOFA specifically targeting grant-making organizations around programs in support of formerly incarcerated individuals slash those in reentry and youth programming. I think the scope in terms of the dollar value stay the same, you know, a cap of 10% for admin fees, and understanding that there will be oversight of who the funds are being dispersed to by this council. Did I capture all of the main concerns?
I think
Okay.
so, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So for next steps, I think it's fair to request a draft of that document by close of business Wednesday. Again, time is of the essence and we need to move on this. And I'd request that we get together to review it before it's posted on Friday. Chairman Robertson, do we need to have approval from does it need to be a full council vote before we post that, or can we have that vote come through this committee?
I believe we should be able to have vote come through the committee.
Okay. And I recognize that pretty much the full council has been attending these committee meetings, so I appreciate that and appreciate your input. So let's ask for a draft by close of business Wednesday, and if there's a challenge with that, Attorney Matravy, please make sure that that is communicated to us if for some reason that timeline does not work. And then I'd like for us to regroup and just run through both what the NOFA is on Friday, in addition to what the review process of those documents will be.
Oh.
I see in the chat, Christina has mentioned that she believes a full council vote needs to be on it before it goes out. Since it's not disbursements of funding yet, I'm not sure if a full council vote is needed. I believe the full council vote will be needed on the approval of who we select in response to it. I believe that the staff is able to just put the document out as a, okay.
That's my understanding.
Okay. Okay, so Wednesday we have the draft of the NOFA, and Friday we will also have a draft of what the process will be for guideline for review by the staff, and then recommendations made to this committee, and then final recommendations made to the council. Any questions on that process? Okay, I know we are over time. I would like to I will ask Paige for her help to set up some time for Friday for us to regroup, and I'm hopeful that that will be a quick discussion because today's discussion was very fruitful. So I really appreciate everyone's feedback, comments, questions, concerns to help us really refine this and get us to a good place of agreement on how we want to take this. I would also like to put on the agenda for when we connect on Friday, a discussion around what are our next steps to the legislature. So we've got a pretty good process in place in terms of how we want to tackle the disbursement of funds for this year. And likely, part of that process is for next year as well. And I think we're coming very close to the time that we need to make a recommendation to the council. Do we have a meeting on the calendar for Monday, the 27th?
Yes, Madam Chairwoman. We have a meeting scheduled for March 27th at 2 p.m.
Do we feel like it's okay if we come back on Monday, or would we prefer to try to connect on Friday as well, just on the NOFA, and we can have a discussion on the next steps on legislature on Monday? I know it's a lot of meeting time, but again, time is of the essence right now.
I agree, Madam Chair. It's whenever we can get that quorum, we need the quorum. That's the most important thing. So
Okay, so let's aim for a meeting on Friday to review NOFA and guidelines for review.
Friday makes sense. In case we don't make it, we always have Monday. So let's Friday
Yes.
is fine.
Excellent. And then Attorney McRavy, you will convey to Director Clay that we're expecting the draft of the NOFA as outlined by close of business Wednesday. So we have an opportunity to review and ask any further questions ahead of the meeting.
Sure, I'll do that.
Thank you. Okay.
Chairwoman Naeem, if there's no further business, I move to adjourn.
I second the motion.
All in favor? Nice.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Take
Thank
care.
you.